I'm Sarah,
And I'm Chelsea.
and this is Weathered.
Reliever.
Um, so welcome back to Weathered.
Welcome back. Sorry if I am coughing. I just sprayed like essential oil in my face. Um,
I love it.
for stress relief.
I love it. That's one of my faves.
I
That's,
know.
that's
And
the way.
we might have tornadoes this weekend. So
I
cool.
saw that y'all have severe. We also have a chance. I think on Saturday. Is that the day for you too?
Yeah, I think Sunday is supposed to be the worst, but
Hmm.
I'm just always, if it's like not fully sunny, even if it is fully sunny, I'm just always like, well, you never know.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Well, guess what I did last week?
What?
I became a trained storm spotter.
I know those of you who
And
are
I
listening
printed a
cannot
little
see
card
this.
for myself.
She has like a card. It says Sarah Sutherland, weather, what does it say? Skywarn. That is hysterical to me.
National Weather Service Skywarn Spotter Program.
She's a pro, guys.
And I learned, which I didn't know this, but so, in Nashville, when we were growing up, we lived really close to the radar, right? Like
We still
literally
do.
very close. Yeah.
Yeah, we still do.
So here where I live now in northern Kentucky, the closest radar to me is in Wilmington, Ohio. So like that's what this, I think it says National Weather Service, Wilmington, Ohio, which is very far. I mean, it's maybe like an hour north of here.
How does that even happen?
And there's one in Kentucky too, but so I don't know. Maybe I should like follow both of them because I think the
Yeah.
one in Kentucky is about the same distance or so. But they told us in this training that the further away from the radar you are, like the least or less accurate your weather is going to be, really.
Yeah.
And so they use people from the community
To
to
weather,
help
to spot
them.
it.
Mm-hmm.
That's you.
So, like, yeah, that's me. So they trained us how to know the difference between different types of clouds because, certain clouds can mean a really bad severe thunderstorm is there
Right.
or a tornado is forming or
Right.
whatever. And then they gave us like a special way to contact the weather service with our reports.
You
And
are the real deal.
and they taught us how to measure stuff appropriately, like hail and snow and water, like for flooding, how to
Yeah,
recognize like flash floods. It was very fascinating.
I know. So what you're saying is that we literally couldn't be more accurate in our weather
Right. You
where I live.
we were very blessed in Tennessee with living so close to the radar and having sort
Yeah.
of a, I feel like in Middle Tennessee, your weather is pretty on par because the
Right.
radar is there.
Wow. That's like the last time it was pretty bad. That's how we always know where the tornado is. I mean, you can see on the screen on the news, like there's the radar. Literally, our house is like,
Yep. Yep.
so lucky me.
Yeah, I didn't
I
realize
guess.
how important it was that like as you get counties and counties away from
Well, that's
the
why
radar.
all of these little towns that are so far away and kind of tucked away, they end up kind of being the worst ones. They don't realize what's
Yeah.
happening. And, there's probably not a radar near them.
And we got to rely on storm spotters.
Storm spotters. Be a storm spotter.
Yep. If you're, yeah, definitely like National Weather Service, they do free. And this was an online webinar. So I just called
Nice.
in and they do like little quizzes. So they test you and make sure you're learning. And then
That's
they
cool.
do in-person ones also, like if you want to do that. But
Well, everybody,
yeah,
hop to it.
get on it. Okay, so today we have a really good episode, obviously, but it is one that is close to our hearts that we personally experienced, and it is the 1998 Nashville tornado.
Yeah.
And
I
you're going to
remember
get to
it
tell
well.
you're going to get to tell your story for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. As like a trauma response, I don't remember details, but I can tell you my what I can remember of it. It was
Yeah,
pretty scary.
yeah. Well, there were actually multiple storms on that day, which I was learning more about as I was researching for this episode. Didn't really realize how many tornadoes there actually were that day. At the time, I was a freshman in high school. And how old were you? I guess I
Oh
was like
gosh.
14.
I don't know. Maybe like
No, I was 15.
second
I just turned
grade or
15.
something.
Second grade?
Yeah, I was like early elementary, 1998. I have no idea. I was in early elementary. I was young. I was too young to be where I was. It's scary.
Oh my gosh,
And
my
also
computer
like
is
there were just
freezing.
so many things that happened that like should have had safety precaution, and we'll talk about that later.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're gonna say. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, my computer was trying to freeze on me, and I was like, "Don't."
Uh-oh.
We've been complaining about
Oh my
technology this whole
gosh.
time. It's
Like
gonna
I
get
just would
better,
rather go
guys.
back to like film cameras and
It's gonna
anyways.
get better, guys. Okay. So that day, April 16th, 1998, a tornado legit almost hit our neighborhood and did end up hitting Nashville and doing a lot of damage in the close vicinity of our neighborhood.
Mhm.
And this was probably the first time that I really became aware of tornadoes and how serious
Me
they
too.
were.
I don't think my life had ever been affected by a tornado until this one.
Yeah, we had actually just moved to Nashville a couple of years before that.
Yeah.
And where we lived before, we were in the mountains. We didn't really experience them.
No.
So this was our first taste.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is I was actually out of town that day. I was in the color guard in high school, and we had traveled to Dayton, Ohio for a competition. And so we were there, but we were getting reports, obviously, from our parents and siblings and everything of what was going on. Now, remember,
I was
this
just thinking to myself, why the heck was I alone that day and
mhm,
you were gone?
I was out of town, and it was, I guess it would have been, I should have looked this up, like what day of the week it was, but it had to have been
It was a
Thursday or
weekday.
Friday because the competition we were at, I think it was probably on a Thursday, but we can look that up and see.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, I was out of town but you were home and you were alone, as you say.
Mhm.
So why don't you tell us what you remember from that day, and then we can go into more details of what was actually reported and what happened.
So like I said, my recollection of this is, I think, probably pretty skewed. But I do remember that when this happened, it was right when I got home from school. And I took the bus home from school at that point. So yeah, early elementary. School was not that far away from here. Like literally from my house, I think my school is maybe a mile, like super close.
Yeah.
There were two or three other kids on the bus with me that day. And I remember pulling up to the neighborhood, everything's fine. Like it looked like it was going to rain. I don't think I
Yeah.
realized what was happening until they just let us get off the bus. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll just go home. And so got off the bus immediately. The whole like sky changed, and it was very quick. It got really still.
Mm,
It was very like greenish yellow. Like I
yeah.
can vividly remember the color. It was like a yellow color. Um, yeah. So like, from the bus stop to our house is actually really close.
Yeah, I was gonna
Like
say it's
really
like
not that
maybe a
far.
couple of blocks, like not
Yeah.
even.
Not even. And so from getting off the bus, I never made it home. Yeah. So immediately after I noticed the sky turning green, it gets really loud. Like the whole like it sounds like a train. That's real. I hear it coming, and this is where things get blurry. It started raining. Everything is like windy. Like we are in my head, we are in the tornado.
Did you get
And
off the bus by yourself, or were there other
it
kids
was
from the
me. It was,
neighborhood?
I think it was two other kids, if I can remember correctly. I won't say their names, but anyways,
Yeah.
um, mom might be able to say who I went to. Someone pulled us into their house. Someone like
Oh.
took us in. Jamie Walmsley, I think. Someone's parents were literally like, and that's kind of all I remember. I remember waking up, or not waking up, but like coming to and thinking, what in the heck just happened? Now, in our neighborhood, we live right next to a cemetery. So there were like
Mhm.
flowers everywhere. Like,
Oh,
like when,
that's what
like,
you remember?
that's what I remember is that there were like flowers everywhere. What I didn't know is that, I mean, right next to our neighborhood was taken out. Like,
Yeah. The
so when I say
Kroger?
we were in, yeah, we were in the tornado, I think we were probably right on the peripheral of it. Like, I mean, we were
Yeah.
right there. I even have a scar on my leg from debris that day.
You
Like a
know,
rock like hit me and I still have there's like an indention that just never went away.
yeah. I was gonna say that we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but where it hit was, I mean, I wish we could measure. Maybe I can like figure out how to measure on Google, but it was right by the bus stop, because the bus stop was right
On
on
shoot
the
lane.
border of
No.
the
Yeah.
Hermitage property, and our neighborhood was on the other side of the street,
I mean,
and
I think I could
it hit the
probably
Hermitage.
walk that distance in a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it is
it's very close.
when I look back, I think they how did that bus not understand what was happening? Like, how did they let us off the bus that day? They just, and then where did the bus go? Because they would have been heading towards the
Yeah.
tornado. And there's
And
another neighborhood up there.
and now we hear a lot about schools either like letting out early or canceling
You know,
school together. And
yeah,
people sometimes get upset about it. And it's like, well, this is a prime example of what could happen, because I mean, what's the bus driver supposed to do, honestly? Because
right.
if you'd stayed on the bus, it
That's
could have
still
been bad too. It's
totally.
like a
But
lose-lose
just the
situation.
thought now of like being a mother, like having your kid get off the bus and get
Yeah.
swept up by, I mean, that's how it felt. Like it felt like we were
Yeah.
like gravity was like pulling us. It was a
Yeah.
really wild sensation. And like I said, I had to have been probably like 8 years old.
I feel like maybe I heard before that you all were trying to get to, because the person you said that pulled you in was a little bit past our house,
Past our
right?
house.
I think you all were trying to get to your friend's house in the neighborhood, which was just a
Yes.
little bit further than our house,
And
but
maybe that's
because no
why,
one
is
was
because
home.
exactly you weren't
Hmm.
home. So I was
Yeah.
like, well, I'm going to wherever,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's just one of those things where, like, once I start talking about it, it kind of starts to click. But like I said, I've kind of blocked it out. I mean, I'm terrified
Well, you were
of
very
tornadoes.
little.
And that was just the beginning. I mean, I have so many more tornado stories since then.
Yeah.
So,
I know,
and we'll
it's
talk about
crazy.
those
This
later
was our
too. So,
first taste of the fear.
yeah.
And
And no, go ahead.
at our competition, we so we were actually like really, really good that year. Like, not,
Yeah.
and it was like the only year we were really,
I
really
remember
good.
you guys were really good.
And we were at the national, international, technically, competition, and
Yeah.
we had done really well. So that's why I think it was on Thursday, because there's always, I think there's like three um competitions. Like, basically you do the first one on Thursday, and then you get to the next one on Friday,
And you
and
keep
then
going.
you make the finals, you go on Saturday. Well, I remember we did really well on Thursday, qualified for Friday, and then on Friday though, we struggled. And actually, when I was researching this, I found an article that said, and it was a random like Reddit thread about Winter
Oh,
Guard or something, and it said 98. We McGavick was one of our favorites. That's where I went to high school. Um, and we think they were like kind of chatting about how they thought that due to the tornadoes in our hometown, that had hit, and we
Oh,
were worried about our families and everything, but
sure.
we kind of like, and it's just so sad because I'm like, man, we could have like,
You could have been the number one
we could
color guard
have.
in the world, except for that tornado.
Uh, so it definitely was a ripple effect all the way up to Ohio.
Yeah, and it is crazy too to think that like it affected me so personally, which sadly it has affected me personally later and later and later. But I guess maybe you'll talk about this later, but our dad was also very
Oh
much a
yeah,
part of this tornado.
we're definitely going to talk about that. It may be in part two because I think this is going to be two parts for
Yeah,
sure.
it's a
But
long one.
it turns out that there were actually 13 tornadoes that day
Whoa.
in Middle Tennessee. 13.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yeah.
Like in my mind, it was just one big one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, we'll hear more about kind of why that was maybe with this one. But
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, I had no idea either. And I really only knew about the one that hit us in downtown, which was, I think, the same one or maybe two. The National Weather Service actually has a really cool graphic that they made, and it's got like each tornado is color coded and you can see the track of it. And so I'll post that with this episode's blog post so everybody can check it out because it's really interesting to see all the different little
Like where it
tornadoes
went.
that,
Yeah.
and you can see the one that came so close to us and the one that hit downtown. But they started early in the morning hours and continued all the way through late afternoon. There are so many different reports from that day. And the National Weather Service actually went back in 2013 and did an updated research report and analysis. And at that time, they ended up sort of changing and updated much of what was initially reported back in 98 and the following years. And so I'll do my best to kind of explain why they did that and sort of what happened. But as you said earlier, the one that hit Hermitage is the one that you experienced, and it hit right at the time the kids were getting off the bus coming home from school. It was reported to have touched down at 3:30 Central Time downtown, which means it hit downtown at 3:40, so it touched down
Okay.
right to the west of downtown at 3:30, hit downtown at 3:40. So I mean, it's moving, so it probably hit you all about 3:50, 3:45.
Yeah.
Because we were
That would
super
be
close to downtown, and
Yeah.
right. Because I mean, you got out of school at probably 3:30,
Yeah, the
and then you
timeline's
got
perfect.
our house, like you said, was like a mile,
Super close.
so that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And our neighborhood was right next to the Hermitage, which it hit right after it had hit downtown at 3:40. And if you're not familiar, the Hermitage is the home of President Andrew Jackson. It's a 600-acre estate, which I didn't know. I know
It's
we've
big.
been there many times. We live right beside it, but 600 acres. And it's really, really beautiful and actually a fun place to visit. We were members there at one time, and there's a winery and live music, and it's a really nice place to just walk if you wanted to like go for a walk or whatever. So, and it's very inexpensive to be a member. But anyway, a little plug for the Hermitage. And that day, over 1,000 trees were blown down. Some that
That's
were over
the one thing. Sorry to cut you off.
No.
Still to this day. I mean, we're talking a lot of years later.
Yeah.
That is one thing that you can't drive down the street without remembering is how treed it was. Like the trees almost covered the road completely.
Yeah.
And now it's still just open.
Yeah, there was that big field, because even though it was a 600-acre estate, there's not that many like buildings on it.
Maybe
So we remember those. We remember those big fields with the big old trees. Some were over 200 years old, and they were actually planted by Andrew Jackson himself.
Oh my gosh.
It's just crazy that they would go that long and then all of a sudden just wiped out.
Gone.
And like you said, it was a crazy sight to see. That whole field that used to just be full of trees was just bare, and it was legit right across the street from where you got let off on the bus.
Literally.
Luckily, not all the structures were damaged, like the actual house and all the buildings, including Jackson's tomb. So he's buried there.
Well, yep.
And so that's good. So those all survived. And fun fact, I didn't know this. that Gibson, the guitar company,
Mhm.
actually took the wood from the destroyed trees
Huh.
and created several special guitars to raise funds to restore the trees.
That's really cool. I did not
Yeah.
know that.
And one of them is actually displayed in the Smithsonian.
Really?
Yeah. So they did
These are
try
some really
to,
cool, interesting facts.
I know. And I mean, it just goes to show you that a lot of things that are reported. I mean, I think there was like one article about that when
Yeah.
it's a big deal. More people should
Yeah,
talk about it.
for sure.
And yeah, so that's a really cool thing where they tried to restore the trees. But like you said, I mean, those trees were 200 years old. So it's
And
going to take some time
that was
for.
like one of the prettiest parts of Hermitage. Like Hermitage, just
Mhm,
like it's a suburb, there's not much going on, but like one
mhm.
of the prettiest parts of it were how those trees covered the road. And
Yeah.
it was just so whimsical almost.
Yeah.
And then it was just gone. It's like we would drive down that road and be like, whoa, like I didn't realize how
Yeah.
cool this was until all the trees were gone.
Yep. So hopefully one day
Crazy.
they will,
They're getting better.
yeah, they'll grow again.
Yes.
That day, there was luckily only one fatality. I know it's not lucky because there was one, but there was one fatality that day. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. This victim's family were really involved in getting more tornado safety measures in place in Middle Tennessee. And our dad, like you mentioned, he was the first responder at the scene. He was with, of
Yeah.
course, a few others, but he was the first group
To
on
get
the
to
scene
him.
that day. Yeah. And so we got his story and we will share. I'll read his story next episode, probably.
Yeah.
Okay. So 13 tornadoes. They actually
Oof.
spanned across 16 counties. The highest rated tornado or multiple tornadoes, which is what updated reports say, were in Wayne and Lawrence counties in southern Middle Tennessee. Those poor counties, they get it all the time.
I know.
And one of these actually clocked in at an F5,
Oof.
which is stronger than the one that hit Nashville that day. So, really
What's
quick,
the highest?
5.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
Yeah. And that's what I was about to say. Really quick, I wanted to get into the ratings and what they
Mm-hmm.
mean. And we may actually do a whole episode at some point about them, but
I
just
think
really
we should.
quick, yeah, as a reference, because it's fascinating. And I think we could spend 30 minutes talking about just like how they're rated, where the scale
For
came
sure.
from. Because something you don't think about is most of these storms, they're rated after the fact. So you don't
Right.
know, they can't tell you, an
There's an
F5 is
F5
coming
right
your
now.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's after the fact. And so, um, okay, we'll get into the ratings and sort of what they mean. So the storms we're talking about that happened in 1998, you'll hear them referenced from F1 all the way up to F5. The F comes from the name Fujita. So in 2007, the scale was actually updated to be more accurate. And at that time, they changed the name to Enhanced Fujita Scale. So it was Fujita Scale at first, and then they changed it in 2007 to Enhanced Fujita Scale. So after
Yeah.
2007, you'll hear the ratings referred to as EF1 through EF5.
Got
Sometimes
it.
they'll say 0 too. That's technically
Yeah.
the lowest. The name actually comes from the Japanese American meteorologist Theodore Fujita. He created this system as a way to classify tornado intensity using damage to structures and the earth. So that's why like it has to be done after the fact. Got to
Right.
see what it does.
Yeah.
And this was in 1971 while he was studying at the University of Chicago. So, the last episode, we were in the
Yep.
20s. They
We
didn't
were
have
up there.
anything like this. So,
Mhm.
this was in 71. He was at the University of Chicago. He was actually the first person to start studying tornadoes in a more holistic way. So previously, meteorologists had basically just used weather data like wind speeds, temperatures, stuff like that. But Fujita started looking at damage patterns, and he would take aerial pictures of the damage paths. He would actually hand draw out many of the reports, and that's how he would put together the Fujita scale and broke it down into 5 categories. So each category is specific to the types of damage and wind speed. And it's actually really, really cool. We can look at it. I can post some pictures, but there's usually like different squares to say, okay, if it meets this square and this square, then you rate it this way.
Right.
And it'll have like the different levels of damage to assess.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's how the Fujita scale came about. And then in 2007, the National Weather Service updated the scale and started calling it the Enhanced Fujita Scale. And from what I understand, they basically did this to improve the ratings and just make it more detailed. So, like, for example, originally the scale didn't take into account the type of structure that was damaged. So, like, if a brick building and a wood building were right next to each other, the brick building might withstand the damage better and would therefore give the storm a lower score than what it maybe really should have been. And so that's why they redid the scale to take into account, okay, well, it flattened to this building, but what type of structure was it?
Right, like a steel building versus a shack. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that really helped them get a better idea. And that's why since then, they've gone back and done some like retrospective reviews of some
and
of
changed some things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. They do research and, you know, write papers about it, and most of them are online. You can find pretty interesting. They get really scientific though. So
I love it.
I get lost.
You're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. We'll dig in and figure it out one of these days. But
yeah, maybe we can have a real life weather expert on here one day. That would be great.
My dream is to have Andy from Ryan Hall's YouTube channel.
Let's get on it.
Anyway, so EF is what you hear now. And but in this story, since it was in 98, F is what we use.
Yes.
So the F5 tornado that struck that day is actually referred to as the forgotten F5. And it's because everyone was so shocked that a tornado hit downtown Nashville.
Yeah.
That the news didn't really report on the ones down south in Middle Tennessee. I guess it was really uncommon, and still is, for tornadoes to hit cities. So even though I think we see it in the news a lot more now, and with social media and everything, we're seeing it a lot more, it's still less than 1% is usually in a city.
Which is really weird to think about when you think about how often I feel like it hits.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot that hit rural that we just don't hear about.
That's sad.
But anyway, the media latched on to that one that day and didn't talk much about the actual worst one that happened. And historically significant one, because this was perhaps the only F5 to ever hit Tennessee to this day.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what you were saying earlier is that our most recent bad tornado was not an F5?
I don't think.
You don't have to. We're obviously going to go into that one again, and that's a whole nother episode. But in my head, it was the worst tornado ever.
I know. And it's,
but it is crazy to think that it doesn't take an F5 to cause tremendous damage.
No, that was an F3.
Wow.
In 2020, and then it became an F4 that hit Cookeville.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Isn't that crazy to think, though, that they're bad? F3s are bad.
I mean, an F3 took out East. It took out East Nashville.
Yeah.
A lot of Nashville. Wow. Okay, crazy. Just to put some perspective.
Yeah.
An EF5 is bad.
And again, kind of back to how rare they are. F5s are less than 1% of all tornadoes. So it's very rare that they're that bad.
Crazy.
And I'm interested to see, because side note, did you see the ones that hit Iowa the other day? Near Des Moines.
I don't think I saw. No, I don't think I saw that.
It looked really bad, but obviously I haven't looked into it, so we'll have to see, and I'm sure we can do an episode. But yeah, some really horrific damage.
Really?
Probably
I'll
the
have to
worst.
look into it.
that I've seen so far this year in 2024. And
Okay.
they've been all over the place.
I have been so out of touch with a new career and a baby that I just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's wild. And I
Oh,
don't know
it's
any
awful.
details about it because it literally just happened maybe like a week ago. So,
Maybe we can see
um,
how bad that one was.
yeah, so super rare are
Yeah.
F5s. This one that was in southern Middle Tennessee, it was at least a mile wide and was on the ground for 23 miles across Lawrence County. Lawrence County is southwest of Nashville along the Alabama state line. It's actually pretty amazing that no one was killed in Lawrence County, although 21 people were injured. Basements are the only reason that people survived that tornado. This thing demolished brick houses into dust. One resident said the only reason they survived is that they made the decision to go to their neighbor's house who had a basement.
Oh my
There was
gosh.
nothing left of their house afterwards. Even the foundation was just obliterated. So,
Okay. Well, I
so I
am
don't feel
very
bad now
pro.
when I go to my neighbor's house too. Y'all don't have
Oh,
a
for
basement here near
sure.
you,
We
do
don't,
you?
I know we're so bad. I was just talking to my boyfriend about this because we would like to buy a home relatively soon. I'm not moving unless there's like we are having an underground basement. And that's the thing is, I mean, who has basements now? Especially if you have a house built, you know, newer than the 80s. Like a lot of people do not have basements.
I think it depends on the land. Like around here, where
True.
it's pretty hilly here, and I think
So you could have
most
we're
people
here.
do, except there's like us, because our house was like one of the ones that after the builder built the neighborhood, they decided they could stick an extra one
Yeah.
here. And so, yeah, me and the one next to us, we don't have a basement, but like literally everyone else does.
That's
So
really
when the
nice.
tornado sirens were going off, I was like,
You're like,
run into
let's
the
go.
neighbor. My neighbor has her cat in like one of those little carry on, like little
Oh,
bag things. I'm like, oh my gosh. So, yeah,
yeah.
these were
Shocking no
bad.
one was killed.
And that day, a single supercell thunderstorm is what started the tornadoes across southern Middle Tennessee. And we will get into more detail about supercells in another episode, but basically, it's a type of thunderstorm that's very likely to produce severe weather, such as tornadoes. That supercell would produce 3 tornadoes across west and southern Middle Tennessee that day, all F4 and higher, which is wild. The
God.
first tornado began in Hardin County. So that's
Yeah.
sort of between Memphis and Nashville, but down
Yeah.
on the bottom of the state line.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to find any reporting on that tornado um,
Yeah.
while it was in Hardin County. But then as it moved east into Wayne County, it was picking up power.
Right.
And the updated report from the National Weather Service in 2013 actually does say that it's clear in their research that the very beginning of the tornado in Hardin County was extremely violent, but was not reported on at that time.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate. Anyway,
Yeah.
along the bottom edge of Tennessee from west to east, it goes Hardin County, Wayne County, and then Lawrence County. And this tornado that went through there was an F4. It ended up killing 3 women in Wayne County. And I couldn't find their names, but News 19 did report that they were 57, 69, and 75 years old. And I think 2 were together and one was
Mm-hmm.
another place. And the 2 were in a mobile home together.
Doesn't surprise
Yeah. And then the one was in a house, but there was literally nothing left
me. Yeah.
but the
Yeah. If you're saying
foundation.
that this thing was taking out brick homes just like pew, then
Yep.
yeah.
So 34 homes were completely destroyed. And yeah, I mean, really, if you're in a mobile home, you're in trouble if a tornado is coming. But
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't even matter.
Yeah. In this case, it probably didn't.
Yeah. And so when it got to Lawrence County, it lifted and came back down. So they're calling that a second tornado. So
I
I
see.
think, yeah, I think sometimes it's reported a little differently. And so like when you first see it and you see the damage path, you might think, oh, that was just one long continuous tornado. But then when they go back and follow the actual path on the ground and look at it, they can see that it lifted
It
and then
hopped
came back
around.
down. So they call it a separate one. And when it hopped up and came back down, that's the one that is an F5.
So it got worse as it was
Yeah. It's
up in
almost
the
like it
air.
like picked up and was like, let's go faster
Let's go.
and
Yeah.
harder.
These things are vicious.
It's crazy.
One of Earth's scariest phenomenons, I would say.
I know. And when we were learning about them in that storm spotter class, and like they were showing pictures, some of the, most, I guess, identifiable pictures of ones, it was just crazy. And now there was a video the other day, I don't know if it was Iowa or where, somebody had a drone, like
in it,
not far from it. It wasn't in it. It was close enough that it was a wild thing to see. And it, like we talked about last time, I think it's so hard to know when videos and online and stuff are real, but
yeah, crazy.
the National Weather Service posts it.
It's probably pretty real.
I believe that they've done their due diligence. Yeah.
They got people for that.
Yeah. So anyway, that F5 ended up being 1 mile wide and was on the ground for 23 miles. This tornado leveled all the homes in its path, even taking out the foundations, like that one survivor said. It debarked trees, killed livestock, and ripped the grass out of the ground in its path. There is even a report of it picking up a 1-ton pickup truck and hurling it more than 300 feet. And for those of you who don't know, a 1-ton would be like the Ram 3500 dually that we used to have.
Which is that's a big truck.
It is a huge and very heavy truck. Yeah.
This thing was strong.
And believe it or not, no one in Lawrence County was killed except for cows.
Well, if I have to choose.
I know. Maybe I guess cows are.
But we love cows too. We're equal opportunity lovers around here.
Poor cows.
I know.
Most of the residents shared that it was because they were able to seek shelter in basements is why they were able to survive. The tornado dissipated as it made its way to Giles and Maury counties. It sort of hopped again, so this would technically be the third tornado from this line of storms in southern Middle Tennessee.
Okay.
Its rating dropped back down to F4, which we know is still super strong.
Horrible.
And scary. It destroyed several more homes and flipped tractor trailers. No one in those areas were killed, so that's good. And these were F4 and F5 tornadoes. So these ones that we just talked about, they were all F4 and F5, and they killed 3 people kind of right when they hit and just left total chaos behind for these rural towns to clean up.
Yeah.
But now we can talk a little bit about the tornadoes that hit Nashville that day. All right. So we talked a little bit about it earlier, but just to give kind of a little bit more of exactly what was reported that day. The F3 tornado that we remember started over on the west side of Nashville at Charlotte Avenue and 46th Avenue, which is like Sylvan Park area. At 3:15 p.m., a radar detected a tornado. So that's one thing, too, is you'll hear, like, we'll get a warning from the National Weather Service when a radar detects rotation.
Picks it up.
And they can also detect debris in the air.
Right.
So at 3:15 p.m., a radar detected a tornado 10 miles west of downtown. And at that time, a tornado warning was issued by the National Weather Service. So that was at 3:15. Which is so funny because it's like, okay, like you said, 3:15, a tornado warning for Davidson County was issued.
Right.
And you got on the bus at 3:30 in Davidson County.
Right. Like, that's what I'm saying. We should have never gotten on that bus. Yes. I still to this day, I'm like, why did we get on the bus?
Yeah, that's wild. I didn't put that together until looking at it just now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it started as an F0 at that time, which of course is the lowest rank. Another thing I find really crazy about the Nashville tornado we've experienced, or tornadoes, is that they follow the same track almost every time.
Yeah.
The first one was back in 1933. And it basically started on the west side around Charlotte Avenue, went through downtown to East Nashville,
Yep.
then to Donaldson, Hermitage, and into Wilson County, which is,
Exactly what happened before
yeah. In
or
98,
after.
in 98, this tornado that came through downtown, it just destroyed all kinds of things. Over 35 buildings were red tagged by the city, meaning they were not structurally sound and not safe to enter.
Yeah.
And we're talking big buildings. So when I talked to Dad about, his memory of that day and as being a first responder and kind of being around the city, he was like trying to explain to me, like, these buildings, okay, these windows are not like your kitchen window at home. Like these are
strong windows.
Yeah. And they were just all blown out. And it was all over the ground, everywhere, everything. So, and as we said, our dad was actually one of the first paramedics on the scene of the fatality downtown that day. So we'll talk a little bit more about that story in a bit. It's actually a really wild and wrong place at the wrong time kind of story. Yeah, so it's an incredible story of the fatality that day. Very sad. And since Dad was the first one there, we have his firsthand experience. And so I think we're going to have to wrap it up for today. But next time we'll get into the events in Nashville that day. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to give our dad's firsthand account of the devastation, as well as more detail about all the damage that happened. And the stories of the news anchors that day is pretty crazy too, because they lost all their audio and power, but they were still determined to try to warn people. So it's pretty neat what they did. So
yeah, and I might I'm pretty sure that our uncle was also
he was there. He was there with Dad.
So I might see about getting his firsthand experience as well, so I can tell that part too.
Yeah.
So big family affair, this tornado.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, we can talk about that next week. Cool.
All right. Well, tell them where they can find us in the meantime.
Yeah. Well, you've heard me say it before and you'll hear me say it again. You can find us on Instagram, Weathered Podcast at Weathered Podcast. And then you can also find us on TikTok at Weathered Pod POD. And you can also email us your firsthand stories as well at
weatheredpodcast@gmail.com.
Sometimes my brain just doesn't work. So
send us your stories, and we will start reading them on the pod.
I will actually post on my own personal social media to see if I can get some firsthand experience from other Nashville natives, because I know I have a lot of friends who were a part of that tornado too. So
yeah, that'd be awesome.
Next week is going to be a good episode.
Yep. So come back and check us out. And until then, stay weather aware.
See you later.
Bye.